Hi there, welcome to Lydia's Books. I am Lydia, and today I want to talk about Nonfiction November for Psychos. Yeah. Not that I'm a psycho, really. The books, though, might be taken a little awkwardly by some people because some of these books have a story behind them. Some of these books are attached to things that are quite controversial. Some of these books are full of lies, deceit, and terror. And some of them are just run-of-the-mill nonfiction books about philosophy, writing, and history. It depends on what you think of as controversial or a good spend of your time when it comes to nonfiction books. I like to read things that are quite interesting and dark, right? So that culmination of interesting nonfiction like true crime that is quite dark, or history that is super dark, or kind of fictionalized stuff. And I keep mentioning like the fictionalized or sensationalized sorts of things, not in relation to the history books that are here on my stack, but this one on the top here. But yeah, Nonfiction November isn't a thing that I've done every single year, although I do read nonfiction books all the time. I just rarely ever talk about them on the show. And I don't really know why. I mean, maybe because it had started out as horror books, right? I only really talked about horror books, but I did do writing craft books, and I do have some gothic books, and I have a very successful video on nonfiction vampire books, which I really should update someday. But those videos are quite popular. The true crime ones weren't, so it was just odd to me. So here we are, Nonfiction November. I've already read or started some of these, and some are to come. But yeah, this is a nonfiction dark reading, or nonfiction for psychos. Some of the books that I'm going to talk about today: Hollywood Babylon by Kenneth Anger, Punk 365 by Holly George Warren with a foreword by Richard Hall, The Nazi War on Cancer by Robert N. Proctor, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William N. Shirer, and Rue Morgue issue 227, mostly because it deals with the Frankenstein film that was just out. And I do read Rue Morgue every month, or every month that it comes out anyway. In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, which you may remember that I've wanted to get to for some time. Fast Fiction by Denise, Jaden, which is a writing craft book, and Dexter and Philosophy by various contributors. It's one of those philosophy collections that are quite popular, and there's a whole library of them. I found it at a book sale at work, and I've been watching Dexter, so it was a fit. And it was a fit in this list, and rounds out a pretty good list of nonfiction for psychos. So on to that first book. I will do some top-down video so that we can see some of the images, but I won't show anything scandalous, of course, from any of these. This one does contain scandalous images, and it's scandalous to begin with, because when I say fictionalizations here within the nonfiction books I'm talking about, this one is notorious for containing that. Hollywood Babylon by Kenneth Anger. There is a Hollywood Babylon 2 as well, which my husband owns. This would be our best find that we found at a library book sale. It was a good price. It is original printing, 1975 edition from what I understand, and this completed that set. Now, if there's any way that number 3 would be published, that would be a treat if Hollywood Babylon 3 actually exists. I hope it does. Now, Kenneth Anger is no longer with us, but he had written this book containing a whole bunch of photographs from the beginning of Hollywood, with Hollywood Babylon, and through some of the most scandalous and important and beautiful images of beautiful people through the history of Hollywood. So I have just started reading this today. This will be my afternoon reading, very cozy, dark reading. It does notoriously contain photos from Black Dahlia and, of course, Jane Mansfield's death, and a lot of other deaths contained. And, of course, a lot of beautiful photos, too. So very interested in reading this take on the origins of Hollywood and some of the more scandalous stories that have taken place there. And then I'll go on to Hollywood Babylon 2 someday. Hopefully I'll mention it on the show when I do, instead of keeping all my nonfiction reading like a secret or something or whatever. But yeah, gorgeous book, really cool find. Another really cool find, this was at a book sale at my work of all places Punk 365 by Holly George Warren with a foreword by Richard Hell. It is massive. This is another great book with important photos of all your favorite bands and a few extras all mixed in, and it is kind of mixed up. Now, there is an odd presentation of this book, I think, for such a fabulous topic. It is a coffee table book, but only if your coffee table is like a milk crate, which I suspect it ought to be if these are your favorite bands. And just beautiful, beautiful photos of a very important era in music, punk era. And it does go from one side of the pond to the other. It does go through certain eras and capture a lot of these bands as they moved through time. But I feel it's awfully mixed up. And it's just really awkward to hold. I guess it could fit in your backpack if you needed it to, but it's very heavy. It's good quality paper. It's got a good quality binding that sort of moves a little bit, which you need with such a thick, big book that's going to open so very wide, right? So I'm glad that it's bound as well as it is. It will last, and it is gorgeous. It's just awkward to read and to hold. But yeah, really, really cool find. Like, what, $2 or something like that for all this book? I was pretty pleased. It's a real thick book. You could like use it as a terrible weapon. And if that is not psycho enough for this list of Nonfiction November books for psychos, we have The Nazi War on Cancer by Robert N. Proctor. This is a book that I've recommended quite a few times to other people, within context, of course, you understand. It becomes a little more timely these days, a book like this, with the rise of conspiracies, conspirituality, Maha, the Yoga Mama craze, that sort of stuff, right? Because it has a lot of the origins of some of our wilder beliefs in food and diet that were part of the most terrible propaganda machine ever, right? So the artwork in this, that is originally why I bought it as a graphic design student, looking at Russian propaganda, German propaganda from the wartime, was an interesting design movement. But of course, I'm rereading the section on the Nazi diet. And I didn't want to say the N word throughout this video because it is a real hot topic these days. And it is always like a point of remembrance and regret, especially because we're in November, the month of remembrance. And we'll get to another book that covers that same sort of topic. This book shows a lot of parallels and explains to me a lot of my discomfort around certain apple cider vinegar people. And it is a very fantastic book with fantastic art, really good research. Of course, it's harrowing knowing what propaganda machine it came from. I do highly recommend it if you're interested in some of the origins of some of our weirder food theories, and if you want to be the person who goes looking for some of the interesting things they did to have people quit smoking and eat better. There was always some interesting science to be found among all the wretched things. Our campaign against tobacco, which is the point of the title, The Nazi War on Cancer. If you wonder why my voice awfully breathless today, and I don't know if it's showing on camera, but I am covered in hives. I've had a horrible cold and then a reaction to the medication. I get hives off of who knows what, random things, but it'll last like a week. That's why for a long time I didn't make any videos. If you notice a big gap between the time I started this channel and then there was a big gap until I moved to this location, it was because I was breaking out in hives all of the time and I couldn't wear makeup and I didn't look right. So it didn't feel right either. I couldn't talk right because my throat's a little closed. But yeah, on a lighter note, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William N. Shirer. This is my grandfather's copy of this book, and as a kid I scribbled in it, and I distinctly remember getting in a lot of trouble for that. It's not a first edition by any means. It was a 17th edition, but still published in 1960, making it a very old book. Now, as I said, my grandfather's copy, one that describes to me the difference between that Germany and our Germany to me when I was a kid, when I was scribbling in the front cover of it. And we came here, the Yerke family, and on my mother's side, in the late 1860s, from a very different Germany than wartime Germany that I learned about as a kid. I don't know much about the Germany we came from. Of course, this is the definitive description of what had gone on in the 30s and 40s. with the rise of the Third Reich. Now, I did use it in high school. I used this on a little paper I wrote in high school on anti-Semitism. And of course, it's interesting reading it now. I'm only a little bit of the way into it, but I was listening to a really great multi-part podcast last podcast on the left. They're doing a series on some of the heavy hitters, so to speak. It was a very cool series about Himmler that really divided a lot of people. Now, there are a lot of discrepancies in that series. And I've noticed with a lot of more armchair historians, there are a lot of things people get wrong. It is so rich and so varied, and there's so much going on in the Second World War that you have to be a real scholar. You need a book this thick to describe one point of view. Now, for a small section in the foreword, I will don my glasses, lest I don't look as authoritative enough without them, and I wouldn't be able to read this small text. I found it extremely difficult, Shirer says, and not always possible to learn the exact truth about Hitler's Germany. The avalanche of documentary material helped one further along the road to truth than would have seemed possible 20 years ago, this being written in 1960. But its very vastness could often be confusing, and in all human records and testimony, there are bound to be baffling contradictions. No doubt my own prejudices, which inevitably spring from my experience and makeup, creep through the pages of this book from time to time. I detest totalitarian dictatorships in principle, and came to loathe this one the more I lived through it and watched its ugly assault upon the human spirit. Nevertheless, in this book I have tried to be severely objective, letting the facts speak for themselves and noting the source for each. No incidents, scenes, or quotations stem from the imagination. All are based on documents, the testimony of eyewitness, or my own personal observation. In the half-dozen or so occasion in which there is some speculation where the facts are missing, this is plainly labeled as such. And I wish people would just believe that about documentarians in the beginning. Yeah, a really wonderful, harrowing tale from somebody who witnessed the entire rise of the Third Reich unfold. And I think that his foreword there speaks a lot to shows like last podcast on the left, where they may get some things wrong, but they are going on several decades old tertiary accounts that may or may not be right, may or may not be mixed in with the truth, or may not contain a speck of truth. I think we have a hard time telling from this far away, although we do need that distance to tell the story. It took him 20 years to come to terms with it all. I guess about 25 years, because it took him about 3 years, I think, to write this book, this massive tome. No doubt he had a lot to say. This is probably the most interesting book here, really, honestly, because it did come from my grandfather's collection, who was a veteran. He didn't see action overseas. He was here as part of the Royal Engineers, so a part of the Air Force as well, I believe. But yeah, he didn't really do much. My grandmother packed parachutes. So yeah, they didn't go overseas or anything really spectacular like that, but they did what they could here from the home front. And of course, later on in life became lifelong members of the Royal Canadian Legion, supporting veterans as they could. So yeah, if you haven't bought your Poppy this year, definitely pick one up next year. And on a lighter note, for real this time, this is Rue Morgue, issue 227. This is the November-December issue for 2025. A really great issue with a fabulous interview with Guillermo del Toro, and it deep dives into religious horror as well. The book section has been growing. That's curated by Monica Kubler, and of course, Andrea Subissati is the editor of the magazine these days, and they did a really, really good job with this issue entirely. But it does go really hand in hand with the Frankenstein film that is out now. I was so pleased to find out that the sled dog scene in the film Frankenstein was filmed on Lake Nipissing near my hometown. It's just a little bit of film fact history fun that warmed my heart, as cold as that tundra appears on film. Now I have filmic proof to show somebody when they wonder what it's like to be ice fishing out there in the middle of February. I can show them now. But yeah, speaking of cold, In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. I don't have like a really sexy version of this or anything, just a little mass market type paperback. I keep meaning to get to this, and after watching a documentary about how surreal it was that Truman Capote descended on Holcomb, Kansas to cover the murders that this is based on in researching the book. Being the first sensationalist true crime novel, it sparked this whole genre that I really, really love. And not so much for the exploitative nature, rather we need reasons nowadays to keep our head on a swivel because we don't have saber-toothed tigers chasing us through the forest. We have one another, unfortunately. /fortunately. And this is the beginning of that descent, that decline of the Western civilization where murder met mystique and media all at once. Wonderful, probably beautiful. I am very excited to read this, but in that it is the thing that sparked the true crime genre. Something that I've been reading since I was a little girl when I first read Helter Skelter and The Hobbit on a really rainy, overly hot August at a cottage with my family. Speaking of the craft of writing, we have Fast Fiction by Denise Jaden. I'm using this to draft my current work in progress, a novel or novella that crosses urban exploration with the paranormal, with creator culture in a hopefully unexpected way. I've never used fast drafting. I've never fast drafted anything over 7,000 words. So this will be really interesting. I've been having a good time with it. And this book I do recommend. If you're a writer and you've tried something like 30-day writing challenges before, but want not just a roadmap or a website or a series of videos that's kind of trying to cheer you on, this has a little bit more of the psychology behind how easy it can be to write a novel within 30 days. It has a lot of interesting prompts that aren't just, a screenplay layout of 30 scenes you need to write. It has really tangible prompts about think about your character and the what they would do. Think about your plot and how you can do this. It's really a neat roadmap. So I'm trying it out. We'll see. If it works, maybe I'll have another novel the next month that has 30 days in it. The challenge, of course, has been writing while I'm sick. I am behind because there were days I just didn't want to do any of that. I think I owe myself about 5 days right now, which isn't too bad. But yeah, unlike people who get sick and watch a bunch of TV, I haven't really. But last month I started rewatching some Dexter. So I picked up Dexter and Philosophy by various contributors. It is a collection of essays, and this is a series of books, Popular Culture and Philosophy. This series editor is George A. Reich, and there's a whole bunch of books that are the philosophy of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the philosophy of The Sopranos. It's a really cool idea from Open Court Books to have these series, and there was quite a lot of them at a book sale at my work. Same place I picked up Punk 365. And it has a really cool blurb on the back from Harold Schechter, speaking of true crime, right? So yeah, this will go hand in hand with watching. I'd revisited a few episodes of Dexter lately from the beginning of the show, hoping to rewatch the series and get to the new show, which I haven't watched yet. I really had fun with this show when I watched it after its initial run, and then reading 2 of the novels that I picked up very, very cheap at a Giant Tiger store of all things. If you're in Canada, you probably know what Giant Tiger is. I don't know if they have them in every province, but I'm pretty sure they don't have them in the US at all. It's like a Canadian little like random stuff discount store. Not like a Dollar General or dollar store at all, but I don't even know what the equivalent is. But anyway, I think this will be a slower read where I get to an essay or 2 as I watch through the series. Have you read any of these? Philosophy of Wizard of the Oz, Harry Potter, Bob Dylan and Philosophy, Monty Python. Really interesting. There was, like I said, quite a few books that were available in the stack when I got this one, but they weren't properties I was interested in reading about. Mind over splatter, it says. So that is it. That is the list of Nonfiction November picks for psychos. Is it just me, or does it seem that nonfiction books kind of get a bum rap? People either don't read them very often, don't read them for fun, or they don't talk about them at the water cooler like they do fiction books. Maybe the George R. R. Martin series of the world and other fantasy series have like supplanted that sort of conversation where people would share more information. I think Devil in the White City is one of the nonfiction books or fictionalized nonfiction books that really did work well that way. It seems everybody read it and everyone's still reading it. Do you read a lot of nonfiction? If you have read some really good nonfiction, I know in my extreme and splatterpunk series, people recommend quite a lot of nonfiction there, and I'm really pleased for it. But not every day do people recommend nonfiction. So if you have one that you've read recently, or one that you've read that's your favorite of all time, let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching, and have an ooky, spooky day.